Christmas is supposed to bring families together, right? For me, it was the night everything fell apart. While laughter and holiday songs filled the room, my dad decided that was the perfect moment to humiliate me, in front of everyone. He called me a leech, told me I was nothing but dead weight, and said I couldn't stay in his house any longer. Everyone froze. I didn't argue, didn't cry, I just stood up, grabbed my jacket, and left. That silent walkout changed everything about my life. After losing my job and struggling to pay rent, moving back home felt like my only option. I told myself it would be temporary, just until I found my footing again. My parents' house hadn't changed much, the same family photos lined the hallway, the same creak in the staircase greeted me every morning. But something else had changed, the atmosphere. It wasn't warm anymore. It felt heavy, like every breath I took there was on borrowed air. I tried my best to be helpful. I cooked dinner a few nights a week, cleaned the kitchen after everyone had eaten, even did the small chores no one liked doing, taking out the trash, mowing the lawn, fixing little things around the house. I thought if I showed effort, my dad might see I wasn't just freeloading. But it didn't seem to matter. He'd glance at me wiping the counter and mutter, "Maybe if you worked this hard at a real job, you wouldn't be back here." I'd laugh it off, pretending the words didn't sting. Most evenings, we sat together in the living room. My mom would try to fill the silence with small talk, asking about job applications or how my search was going. My dad, though, barely looked up from his newspaper or the TV. Every question felt like a test I was failing, every silence, a disappointment too loud to ignore. Even when I tried to share good news, like landing an interview, his response was always the same flat tone, "We'll see if it leads anywhere." Still, I held on to hope. I told myself it was just stress, that maybe he was worried about me, even if he didn't know how to show it. Christmas was coming up, and I thought maybe that could change things. I'd use it as a chance to start over, to show him I was still trying, still the son he could be proud of. I started saving little by little from the part-time jobs I picked up, deliveries, odd online work, anything that brought in a few dollars. I used some of it to buy small but meaningful gifts for everyone, a new scarf for mom, a set of tools for dad, something thoughtful for each of my siblings. I wrapped them carefully, wrote personal notes, and tucked them under the tree days before Christmas Eve. That night, as the lights flickered softly on the tree and the smell of cinnamon filled the house, I actually felt good for the first time in months. I looked around at the decorated living room, the warmth of the fire, and thought, maybe this year, we'd sit together like old times. Maybe Dad would smile, even just once. I didn't know it then, but that quiet hope I carried would soon be shattered in the most humiliating way possible. The dining room glowed with soft, golden light. The chandelier cast a warm shimmer over the polished table, reflecting in the silver cutlery and crystal glasses. The scent of roasted turkey, cinnamon-glazed carrots, and freshly baked bread filled the air, blending with the faint notes of carols playing from the living room. Everyone was dressed nicely, cheeks flushed with the kind of warmth that only comes from family and food. For a brief moment, I almost forgot the tension that had hung in the air for months. We passed dishes around, laughed over small jokes, and reminisced about old Christmas mornings. My mom was smiling more than usual, her eyes soft with relief that everyone was getting along. Even my dad had cracked a few jokes earlier, making everyone laugh. I thought maybe, just maybe, tonight would be different. But peace in that house never lasted long. It started small, like it always did. My aunt was talking about how her son had just gotten promoted, showing off pictures of his new apartment. My dad chuckled and said, "Looks like someone's got his life together." The comment wasn't directed at me, not at first. But I felt it in my stomach, that slow tightening that told me it was coming. A few minutes later, as the laughter faded and plates were being refilled, he looked across the table at me. "So," he began casually, "how's the job hunt going? Found anything that doesn't involve sitting around all day?" The room went quiet for a second. I smiled politely, trying to keep it light. "Still applying. I've got a few interviews lined up next week." He nodded slowly, stabbing at his food. Interviews. Been hearing that for a while now, haven't we?" My mom placed her hand on his arm. "Please, not tonight," she whispered. But he wasn't done. "No, I'm just saying, Christmas dinner seems like a good time to talk about pulling your weight. You've been living here rent-free for what? 6 months now?" The words hit harder than he probably intended, or maybe exactly as hard as he wanted. I could feel every pair of eyes shift toward me. My younger sister looked down at her plate. My uncle cleared his throat. I wanted to disappear into the chair. Dad, I started softly, but he cut me off. You know, when I was your age, I was already supporting a family. Not sitting around in my parents' house waiting for things to happen. You think the world owes you something, but it doesn't. The air turned heavy. Even the Christmas lights seemed to dim. My mom tried to interject again, voice trembling, "Honey, please, let's not do this." He slammed his fork down. "No, I'm tired of tiptoeing around it. He needs to hear it. You're a leech. You're sucking the life out of this house while pretending you're trying. You're a grown man who never grew up." His words echoed through the room like thunder. For a moment, no one breathed. The music in the background kept playing, faint and painfully cheerful, like the world hadn't noticed my humiliation. My face burned. I could feel tears welling up, but I refused to let them fall. I stared at my plate, trying to steady my breathing, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. Every instinct in me wanted to shout, to defend myself, to remind him of everything I'd done, but I didn't. Instead, I reached for my napkin, folded it neatly beside my plate, and stood up. My mom looked up at me with watery eyes. "Please, don't go," she whispered, her voice breaking. I managed a small smile. "Thank you for dinner, Mom. The food was great." Then I turned to the rest of the table. "Merry Christmas, everyone." No one said a word as I walked to the hallway, grabbed my coat, and slipped on my shoes. The house was silent except for the faint sound of clinking cutlery as someone nervously shifted in their seat. When I opened the front door, the cold air hit me like a slap, sharp and real. I stepped outside, the warmth of the house fading behind me. For a moment, I stood there, my breath clouding in the winter night, the muffled voices of my family still echoing faintly from inside. Then I walked away, no shouting, no slamming doors. Just the crunch of snow beneath my shoes and the sound of my own heartbeat reminding me that silence, sometimes, is the loudest thing in the world. The cold hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just the winter air, it was the weight of everything that had just happened. The streetlights glowed faintly through the falling snow, and the sound of distant laughter from other homes made the silence around me feel even heavier. Christmas night, and I was walking away from the only place I had left to go. I didn't know where I was heading. I just knew I couldn't turn back. I sat in my car for a while, the engine off, the windows fogged. My breath made little clouds in the dark, and I could still hear his words echoing in my head, "You're a leech. You never grew up." Over and over, like a cruel song I couldn't switch off. I stared at the steering wheel, thinking about how many times I'd tried to prove him wrong, how every small achievement had been met with a shrug, or worse, a reminder that it wasn't enough. There was a time he used to be proud of me. I remember being 12, standing on a little league field, and hearing him cheer when I hit a home run. I remember how he smiled when I got into college, that proud, genuine smile that made me feel like I could do anything. Somewhere along the way, that pride had turned to resentment. Maybe it was when I failed my first big job, or when I came home broke after trying to start something on my own. To him, I stopped being his son who tried, I became his son who failed. I finally started the car and drove. Nowhere in particular, just away. The streets were empty, the world wrapped in quiet snow. After a while, I found a cheap roadside motel with a flickering neon sign that read vacancy. I paid cash for one night. The room smelled faintly of cigarettes and cleaning spray, but it was warm. I sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing my coat, staring at the peeling wallpaper. I didn't cry. Not yet. I think I was too numb for that. It wasn't until I lay down and stared at the ceiling that it hit me, the reality of being completely alone on Christmas. My phone buzzed once, a message from my mom, "Please, come back. We can talk in the morning." I didn't reply. What was there to say? She wouldn't change his mind. And I was done begging for space in a house where I was no longer welcome. Somewhere between exhaustion and anger, something inside me hardened. If he really believed I was a leech, fine. I'd show him just how far a leech could go when pushed out into the world. That thought became the only thing keeping me warm in that cold room. I decided that night that I would build something on my own, something he couldn't take credit for, couldn't criticize, couldn't touch. The next morning, I checked out of the motel and drove to a cafe that offered free Wi-Fi. I spent hours scrolling through job boards, applying to anything I could find, delivery work, remote gigs, part-time positions. I picked up a small courier job first, driving long hours for little pay, but it was enough to keep the gas tank full. At night, I'd park somewhere quiet, recline the seat, and sleep in the car until my next shift. Days turned into weeks, and the bitterness I carried slowly turned into fuel. I started learning new skills online, coding, design, freelancing platforms, anything that could help me climb out of that hole. Every rejection hurt less than the last because now I wasn't trying to prove anything to him anymore. I was doing it for me. There were nights when the loneliness crept back in, when I missed the smell of home-cooked meals or the sound of laughter in the living room. But every time I thought about going back, I remembered that look on his face, that disgust, that disappointment, and I kept going. One night, while working late on a freelance project, I earned my first real paycheck. It wasn't much, but it felt different. It felt like the start of something that belonged entirely to me. I smiled for the first time in weeks, whispering to myself, not bad for a leech. That small win became the spark. I didn't know it yet, but that moment, in a cheap motel, surrounded by broken furniture and cheap lights, was the true beginning of my life. The months that followed were some of the hardest of my life, but also the most defining. Every morning, I woke up before sunrise, still in my car or on a friend's couch, and reminded myself that this version of me, the one who had nothing, was temporary. I worked double shifts delivering packages, then spent nights glued to my laptop, teaching myself everything from online marketing to coding. Sleep became a luxury, but progress became an addiction. Every small win felt like proof that I could survive without the walls that had once made me feel trapped. Eventually, a friend from college heard about my situation and offered me his couch. "Just until you get back on your feet," he said. It wasn't much, a one-room apartment that smelled like instant noodles and burnt coffee, but it was a roof, and it gave me enough stability to think clearly again. I promised him I'd be out in a few weeks. It took me 3 months. During that time, I poured everything I had into freelancing. I took on small design gigs, social media work, anything that paid. I remember getting my first steady client, a small business that needed help with their website. When they sent that payment confirmation, I just stared at the screen, frozen. It wasn't about the money, it was about validation. For the first time in a long time, I felt capable. I saved every dollar, cutting corners wherever I could, living on cheap noodles, skipping nights out, refusing to spend on anything that wasn't essential. After 6 months, I signed the lease on my own tiny studio apartment. It wasn't fancy, the walls were bare, the floors creaked, and the water heater made strange noises, but it was mine. I remember standing in the middle of that empty room, holding the keys, whispering, "Welcome home," to myself. The first night I slept there, I didn't have a bed yet. Just a blanket and a pillow on the floor. But I felt freer than I ever did in that big family house. No one could call me a burden here. No one could tell me I wasn't enough. The silence that used to feel suffocating now felt peaceful, earned. As the weeks passed, I started decorating bit by bit. A thrifted couch. A second-hand desk. Some plants by the window. I even bought a small Christmas ornament that I hung near my computer, not because I cared about the holiday, but as a quiet reminder of the night everything changed. Work started picking up. 1 client turned into 3. Then 5. Then a small company offered me a full-time remote position based on the portfolio I'd built from scratch. For the first time, I wasn't surviving, I was living. And I didn't post about it online, didn't text my family updates, didn't try to prove anything. I let my silence be my success. A year passed before I heard from my mom. Her name lit up my phone screen one evening as I was cooking dinner in my little kitchen. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something in me hesitated. I answered. Her voice was soft, unsure. "Hey, honey. How are you?" she asked. There was a pause, the kind that carries all the words left unsaid. Then she added, "Your dad's been asking about you." I didn't say much, just that I was doing fine, working, staying busy. She sounded relieved, but also sad. "He doesn't say it out loud," she whispered, "but I think he regrets that night." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to ask why it took him a year to realize that, but I didn't. Instead, I thanked her for calling and said I'd talk to her soon. When I hung up, I sat there quietly, staring at my reflection in the window. My life looked nothing like it did a year ago, and that was the point. I didn't rush to visit. I didn't need to. I had built something that couldn't be undone by anyone's words, not even his. Every morning I woke up, brewed my own coffee, opened my laptop, and started working again, not for approval, not for validation, but because I had finally learned that the best revenge isn't showing them what they lost. It's showing yourself what you can become when you stop waiting for their permission to grow. It was almost 2 years after that Christmas when my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't my mom. It was him. Seeing my dad's name on the screen sent a strange chill through me. For a moment, I considered letting it ring out, pretending I didn't see it. But curiosity, and something deeper I couldn't name, made me swipe to answer. "Hey," he said after a long silence. His voice sounded smaller, worn. "It's been a while." "Yeah," I replied quietly, unsure where this was going. He asked how I'd been, how work was, where I was living now. His questions were normal, casual even, but the pauses between them carried a weight that felt like regret. He didn't mention that night. Not yet. He just kept trying to sound like a man who hadn't called his son a leech in front of an entire family. After a few minutes, he finally sighed. "Listen," he said, voice low. "Your mom's been telling me you're doing well. I'm glad to hear that." He stumbled over the words, like they were foreign in his mouth. "Maybe you could come by sometime. Just for dinner." It wasn't an apology, but I could hear the strain in his voice, like he wanted to say more but didn't know how. I told him I'd think about it. When I hung up, I sat in silence, staring at the walls of my apartment. The space around me felt safe, but suddenly, a part of me wanted to see what home looked like now, if it still felt like home at all. A week later, I drove back for the first time. The house looked smaller, older than I remembered. The yard was overgrown, the paint on the front door faded. My mom opened the door first, tears already in her eyes. She hugged me tight and didn't let go for a long time. When I stepped inside, it was like walking into a memory that had lost its warmth. The same pictures were still on the wall, but they felt like ghosts from another life. Dad was in the living room. He looked older too, tired, thinner. When he saw me, he stood up slowly. "Hey," he said, almost a whisper. "Hey," I replied. We sat down at the table, the same one from that Christmas night. For a while, neither of us spoke. The ticking clock filled the silence. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology," he said, eyes fixed on his hands. "I was angry. Stupid. I thought I was helping you toughen up, but I see now I just pushed you away." He looked up at me then, his eyes glassy. "You didn't deserve that. Any of it." I didn't know what to say. For years, I'd imagined this moment, how I'd tell him off, how I'd finally make him understand what he'd done to me. But sitting there, looking at a man who was no longer the towering figure from my childhood but just human, I felt something shift. The anger I'd carried for so long didn't feel sharp anymore. It just felt heavy and tired. "I'm not angry anymore," I finally said. "I just needed to build my own life, without waiting for you to believe I could." He nodded slowly, the weight of years showing in his expression. "You did good," he murmured. "Better than I ever did at your age." We talked for a while, not much, but enough. When I left, my mom hugged me again and slipped a small bag of food into my hand, like she used to when I was younger. My dad stood by the doorway, watching quietly. As I walked to my car, he called out, "I'm proud of you, son." I didn't turn around. I just smiled faintly and kept walking. Driving home that night, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vengeful or superior. I just felt free. For the first time, the past didn't have claws in me anymore. His apology didn't erase the pain, but it didn't need to. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't for him, it was for me. As the road stretched ahead and the night sky opened above, I finally understood the truth I'd been chasing since that Christmas. Sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's the sound of finally letting go. I learned something that night: you don't need to shout to make your point. Sometimes, walking away says everything you ever wanted to say. My dad thought calling me a leech would break me. Instead, it built me. I found strength in my silence and peace in my independence. Family doesn't always mean home. Sometimes, home is the life you build after they push you out. And that Christmas, as painful as it was, became the night I finally unwrapped freedom.